Hey there, my fellow designers and creatives. Hope you're all doing well. Welcome to another video in my mega product design course for beginners. This is a two-part series where I show you how to take a problem statement and solve it completely from scratch using ChatGPT. In the first part of the video, I show you how to go ahead and set the problem statement, how to get your user personas right, and how to formulate a set of questions that you need answers to in order to ask ChatGPT for solutions and directions. And in this video, we're going to go ahead and look at that and try to see how we can solve the entire problem now that we've gotten a lot of clarity. If you haven't watched the first part, make sure to watch the first part of the video. And if you have, we can continue with this video. So without any further ado, let's get started. Now, before I get started, I want to quickly take a few seconds talking about learnproduct.design. It's a guide that I released a couple of weeks ago, and it's the ultimate guide to help you become the designer the industry wants. You can come down here to the chapter section and check out everything that I'm going to be talking about and I'm going to be teaching. I'm going to be releasing chapters on a regular basis, so if you're super interested and serious about learning product design, highly recommend you check this out. All right, now let's get back to the video. Now, a super quick recap, right? So the problem statement was to design an experience that allows travelers to rent lockers in train stations for a short-term period. This was the main design brief that we had to solve for. And what we did was, at the very end, we ended the video with having a user flow of two options, without an app and with an app. And we're going to focus on without an app for the first part, right? And we had a bunch of questions that, we have to ask ChatGPT because these are uncertainties. We don't know how this works. Some of these are confusing, right? So now we're going to go ahead and get answers and make design decisions and solve this finally, right? So let's start off with that. So I'm going to start off with the first step, which was basically this. So a traveler arrives at the train station and sees a kiosk or a vending machine. In this case, we're just going to assume there's a kiosk for the rental service. And some of the questions that we had was, can there be a solution without a kiosk? Because this might lead to longer queues, right? People are going to be busy, right? And can we have a system of reserving a locker, right? Makes a lot of sense. Now, from here on, we need to actually start solving these, right? So either we can come up with solutions on our own or we can take the help of ChatGPT. So what I decided was that there can be a couple of options, right? One, there can be a kiosk. That's option one. The second one is that the user can go directly to the locker and books a locker from the locker itself, right? So if there are 100 lockers, you can go and find a locker and occupy that locker. It's just like occupying a seat in a train station, right? There can be a digital board of sorts that shows the vacant and taken lockers, right? So you can see which locker you want, you can see the size that you want, and then you can go to that locker and then start the booking process, right? So I can also mention over here that also have an option for a kiosk, and I'll actually tell you why we might need a kiosk as well, right? And then the final one is in order to reserve, users will have to download the mobile app, right? So with the mobile app, you will be able to reserve it. So typically we now have three options. We can directly go to the locker. We have an option for a kiosk and the mobile app. Now the mobile app stuff, we'll look at that a little bit later, but for now, this is what we have. All right, perfect. Now let's move forward. Now the traveler approaches the kiosk and selects the size of the locker they need, right? Now in this case, it can be approaches the kiosk, uses the app, or actually I'm going to say kiosk, approaches the locker or uses the app and selects the size of the locker they need and the length of time they want to rent it for, right? Now, the questions that I had was, is it better to do on a per hour basis or a combination of hourly tiers, and how many sizes, right? Now, the thing is that the answers to these questions very much depends on your target users that you have over here, right? And depending on their needs and how frequently they would want to use it and what are the items that they're going to have, it makes sense to put your pricing strategy accordingly to that, right? But let's see what ChatGPT can tell us about this. So the first question that I asked was, what would be the ideal size types for these lockers, right? So the ideal size for these lockers would depend on the specific needs of the train station and its visitors. Like I said before, it's important to understand your current users, right? However, there are a few options that could be considered. So small lockers that could be around the size of a shoebox and would be suitable for storing small items such as wallets, passport, smartphones. All right. Medium lockers, who would want to place things like backpacks, laptop bags, small suitcases. Large lockers that would be suitable for storing large items such as suitcases, duffel bags, and sports equipment. That's interesting, right? A lot of tourists might be going on for adventure sports and, they might have sports equipment. extra large lockers that would be suitable for storing large items such as bulky luggages, bicycles, etc. Now, if you're going to some of the popular European cities like Berlin or Amsterdam or anywhere in Germany or Netherlands, they ride a lot of bicycles, right? So maybe they travel with bicycles as well. But like I said, it's important to understand your target users. Now, coming back to Figma, if we were to look at our use case, which are basically the user personas, we have Sophia, and she just needs to store small items, right? Maybe like a cash, jewelry, documents, and maybe a small suitcase, right? And Jack here also needs to store an item such as a suitcase. It could be a pretty big suitcase as well, right? Now, the other thing that we could do is we could also make Sophia, if she's into adventure sports, right? She might even need to store, equipments like sporting equipments, right? So I'm going to say sporting equipments, right? And that might include a bicycle as well, right? So given that 70% of the people might want small and, large, and Jack might probably need a medium or a large, right? We have some information to now make a design decision, right? So if I come back over here, I had initially written small size for wallets and documents, around 45% of the people might use it. Medium size, small suitcases, laptop bags, backpacks are around another 45%, right? And large size, such as big suitcases and sport equipments, would probably take up 10%. Now, this will also help us to determine what is the quantity of small size, what is the quantity of medium size, and what is the quantity of large size, right? Now, in certain cases, for example, if you are in a very big touristy area which has a lot of adventure activities, then people might come there with a lot of sport equipment, right? So from 10%, you might want to make it 20% or 30% or maybe even 50%, if that makes more sense, right? But it's important to understand your users and then make a design decision, right? Perfect. Now, the next thing that I wanted to ask was, when users select the length of time they would like to rent a locker, right? Should the pricing be based on a per hour basis or a set duration of hour tiers, right? I've directly asked this question and looking to get an answer from ChatGPT itself, right? So let's understand. The pricing for a locker rental can be based either on a per hour basis or a set duration of hour tiers, and it totally depends on the needs of the train station and what would be the most convenient for the users, right? So again, consider your user personas all the time and then make a decision. So per hour basis model would be useful for users who want to select the exact length of time, right? This could be beneficial for users who need to store their luggage for a very short period of time, right? And again, what is short period of time? It's a little unclear at the moment, right? Minimum tiers, this pricing model would offer certain rental periods such as 4 hours, 8 hours, 24 hours at a fixed rate. All right. And this could be beneficial for users who want to store their belongings for a longer period of time rather than a set period of time. Right. And it could be ideal to offer both options, as this would give more flexibility to users and they could choose the option that suits best for them. Now, the problem with this is that it just brings in a lot of cognitive load, right? So if you want something for 3 hours, would you actually take 3 individual hours, or would you take a slot that gives you for 4 hours, right? Three hours, 3 individual hours versus a 4-hour slot, it becomes too much cognitive load for the user, right? It too much options for the user. This is what we call as paradox of choice or analysis paralysis, right? So even though ChatGPT gave us an answer, it's up to us to make a design decision. So what I did was I decided to have a combination of hourly tiers, but then make it 0 to 2 hours, 0 to 4 hours, 0 to 8 hours, 0 to 15, 0 to 24, and 0 to 48 hours. Right. So mine is sort of a combination of a per hour basis and a combination of hourly tiers, right? Because if I were to consider somebody like Sophia over here, right, she's going to stay for a very large period of time. She's probably going to stay for 2 to 3 days or maybe even a week, right? And that is 70% of the users, right? So which means that given that she's going to stay for a few days, right, I would probably want to have, where was that, right? So I would probably want to have multiple tiers, right? Such as probably 15 hours or 24 or even 48 hours, right? Can it go more than that? Maybe, maybe not. We're not sure. But right now we're just assuming that 48 hours would be like a good period of time, which is basically 2 days. Now, we also have the other one, Jack, right? He's a business traveler and he's staying for less than 12 hours a day, and the percentage of users is 30%, right? Now, again, this is an assumption, right? This is what I'm basing all my design decisions on, right? So probably Jack would probably, fall into this category, 2 hours or 4 hours or 8 hours, right? Sometimes business meetings get longer. Sometimes you don't know what your schedule is. Sometimes your trains get canceled, right? So having a good set of options makes a lot of sense. All right, perfect. Now, next, moving on. Now, this is where things get a lot interesting. So the traveler selects the duration that they need and also the size of the locker they need. All right. And the traveler pays using cash, credit card, or a mobile payment app. Now, it's very important to understand how this works. The first question is why prepayment, all right? And maybe use a deposit if that is, more beneficial, right? So now what I did was I asked ChatGPT, what is the benefits of prepayment and what are the benefits of post payment, right? And also, maybe should you have a deposit system, right? So let's go and read what ChatGPT says. So, what are the pros and cons of asking users to pay for the service before the time starts and after the selected duration ends, right? We have just asked this direct question. So, here are some pros and cons, right? So, the pros, basically the advantages of paying before the time starts. Now, the thing here is that it can reduce the risk of non-payment, right? As users are required to pay upfront before they can access the locker. Right? Now, this point is so important because if you allow users to pay later, right, and they have booked a slot for 4 hours, they can actually come at 3 hours and take away their belongings and go away and never make the payment itself, right? So users can still access their locker anytime within that 4-hour period, right? So in order to prevent that non-payment risk, right, users are requested to pay upfront. It can simplify the rental process as users don't have to worry of paying it again at the end of the rental period. Makes a lot of sense. It can allow for smoother operation of the train station. It also allows pre-booking of lockers, right? So when you reserve a locker through the mobile app, it can be helpful for that as well, right? But what are the disadvantages of that, right? Now, users may not be able to accurately predict how long they will need the locker, right? And they may end up paying for more time than they need. So what this basically means is that users may not really know how long they might need it for. They might have an average and they might be hesitant to pay money because they don't really know how long they need it for, right? This might be a small use case. Users may feel less inclined if they have to pay upfront, right? It's sort of like a weird experience or an uncomfortable experience for them. Users may also have to pay for a duration they don't use in case they try to retrieve their belongings before the rental period ends, right? So, for example, if they use their locker only for 3 hours and that extra 1 hour is wasted if they had chosen a 4-hour period, right? So, now that we have pros and cons, right? And now it's up to us to make a design decision depending on our users. Are users accustomed to a situation like this? Do they understand how this works? Would they be willing to use the service, right? So knowing our users, we can then go ahead and look at all the pros and cons and then make design decisions. Right? Now, the pros and cons of paying after the end is basically the reverse of these two. So I'm not going to read it. It's basically the opposite of what's already mentioned. Right? So with that information, what I said is that users should be able to access the locker as many times as they want. Right? So if they chose a 4-hour period, they should be able to access it anytime they want. If we ask people to pay at the end of 4 hours, it becomes impossible to charge them, right? Because they might collect their luggage at the end of 3 hours and then run away. Right? So that's why we need prepayment. Now you can also have a kiosk for those who want to pay by cash. All right. Because the machine or the kiosk may or may not accept cash, right? It depends on the technology. If it can accept cash, good. If it cannot, then, I don't know, right? Maybe there must be an actual person who might be standing and probably do this manually, right? Maybe we can ask users to place a deposit of a certain amount when renting the locker, right? So instead of a prepayment, you do a deposit, right? The deposit will be refunded if the luggage is collected within the time frame selected by the user, right? So what this basically means is that user has to pay a deposit, all right, plus fees for the time slot, right? So they have to make more payment. And you get the deposit, of course, if you've met all the conditions and you have not done any damages, if you have not exceeded your time, right? If having a deposit adds friction to the user, right, then it would make sense to not have a deposit system. But again, how do you make this decision? Depending on our users. Now, in our case, we can assume that users are not going to be comfortable with a deposit and they are more than fine to pay some amount upfront. Now, I actually did go to ChatGPT and ask, would it make sense to ask users to make a payment, to make a deposit to use their locker rental service, right? And there are advantages over here. It can reduce the risk of non-payment as users are required to pay a deposit before they can access the locker, exactly the point that I said. It helps to cover any cost of damages and any form of collateral in case the user doesn't return to pay for the service at the end of the rental period, right? The disadvantages, right? It can make it more expensive for users as they need to pay both the rental fee and the deposit, obviously. It can be a barrier for entry because sometimes people may not have deposit, like a big deposit in the beginning, right? It can also be an administrative burden for the train station as they need to keep track of the deposits. Then there is going to be tickets and issues of, reversal or refunds, and all of those problems might come in, right? So the disadvantages are actually more severe than the advantages. So it's better to not have deposits so that we can prevent these disadvantages. All right, so that is great. Now, moving forward, right? So the kiosk generates a unique code, right? So here the kiosk generates unique code and displays it on the screen. But if it's the locker itself, right? If the process is being done in front of the locker will generate a code itself. The traveler writes down the code or sort of takes a screenshot of it, right? Whatever it is. This is not a secure solution because obviously people can see it if it is a kiosk, right? If it's a locker, it's fine. People may not be able to see it. But if it's a kiosk, then people will be able to see it. So I went to ChatGPT and actually got answers for this as well, even though I knew what the answers would be. So here I mentioned, if the kiosk generates a unique code and display it on the screen, won't it be a privacy issue? Are there better solutions, right? So ChatGPT gave a few answers, right? So generate a code and send it to the user via email or text message, right? Now this will work only if the user has like a mobile phone or some sort of a device, right? If there is no device, then it's going to be a problem, right? Or they must have access to, a laptop or something where they can check their email as well, right? A QR code is a good idea, but again, you might need a mobile device, right? A smart card or a wristband, or use, probably biometrics and stuff like that. Now, to that, I asked a follow-up question. What if users don't have a mobile device with them, right? Now, you're suggesting all digital solutions, right? What if they don't have a mobile device? And that's where the answers started coming, which started making a lot more sense. Use something like a paper receipt. The kiosk could print out a paper receipt with a unique code on it, which can be used to access the locker. This would provide a physical record of the rental that the user can keep with them, even if they don't have a mobile device, right? So we are getting answers over here. Now, this is probably a very obvious answer, right? But it's nice to see that ChatGPT is giving sensible answers. Now, there are also a lot of other things over here, which I'm not going to get into. These are just, overcomplicating things. But this is a very simpler situation. So that's what I mentioned over here. It's better if the kiosk gives a receipt with an unique code for users who don't have a mobile phone with them or no access to the internet. It can also send the code to the email or phone number provided by the user. Right? A QR code can also be used as a method to get the code, right? So if you don't really want to share your phone number or email ID, you can just go ahead and scan it and you can get a code and you can take a screenshot of it on your phone, right? So this way you're not actually sharing any information. You can just, have your privacy and, just use a QR code inside, right? So we're trying to solve for all edge cases and use cases over here. Perfect. So the next one is the traveler locates the row of lockers and finds an available one. So here, obviously, the kiosk should automatically assign a locker number. Or if you're already at that locker, your job is probably done. And if you're using a mobile app as well, then your job is also probably done, right? The app should tell you the locker number. Cool. So then the traveler enters the code into the locker and opens it or whatever it is. Then the traveler can place the belongings in the locker and sort of closes the door. Now the question here is, can the user open the locker as many times as they want? Ideally, they should be able to. Yes, they should be able to open as many times as they want, right? Now the reason they can do that is because they have done a prepayment over here, and that means you can then now sort of access the locker for as much time as you want, provided it's within the selected time frame, right? Cool. Now here are a couple of edge cases. Now, the traveler keeps the code in a safe place and retrieves their belongings from the locker when they're ready to leave the station, right? Now, a couple of questions. What if the user forgets the code, right? What if they lose access to that code, right? Maybe they forgot it. Maybe they lost their phone. Maybe they lost that piece of paper, right? There needs to be a backup system. What if the user picks up the luggage after the expiry? Maybe I'm going to say after expiry of the selected duration, right? What if you do it then? So again, I went to ChatGPT and asked ChatGPT these questions, even though I had a couple of answers myself. So the first one, what if the user forgets or loses access to the code, right? Now, of all the 5 things, let's quickly read them, right? Email and text recovery. Now, the point here is that I don't need to do this if I have access to my mobile device, right? I have a photo of it, or I have an account on my app, or I have it in my email address, right? So I can just access that and get the code even if I forget it, right? So this doesn't make sense. ID verification, right? ID verification also is a good idea, but what if I don't have my ID cards with me, right? What if I don't have anything, right? Then attendant assistance, right? So this is a manual thing, but here we are talking in a self-service system. Then you have self-service recovery. The user could be presented with a recovery interface on a kiosk where they can enter the information they use, such as the email address or phone number, right? This is pretty much like your, like your password reset or your PIN reset. But the point over here is this can be easily misused, because if you have somebody else's phone or phone number or access to their email, or maybe you didn't even provide a phone number or an email address, right? Because if you come over here and in this use case where you're not providing any phone number or email and you're just using a QR code in order to get the access to the code, the system does not have your phone number or email ID because you never provided it, right? So in that case, what you're going to do? Right? So something that makes a lot of sense over here is having a backup code, right? The user can have a backup code, which is provided by the user itself, right? So sometimes people use it as their year of birth. Sometimes it's a couple of digits that they know. Sometimes it's the digits of their phone and stuff like that, right? So if they have a backup code, they can enter the backup code. This code could also be written on a piece of paper. But again, what if you lose this piece of paper, right? You don't know what the backup code is, right? So what I would suggest is that, if I were to come down over here, the user should set a backup code, because this is something that the user may not usually forget. Now, what if the user picks up the luggage after the expiry of the selected duration? What are the things that we can do? Now, if the time has elapsed, the user can pay an extra fee to open the locker, right? There can be a fixed fee for every 30 minutes. The authorities have an option to retrieve the luggage after 4 hours of the period selected by the user. So what this basically means is that if you selected a 2-hour period and you failed to collect it after 6 hours as well, so that is 2 plus 4, then authorities can remove it, right? So that it can be made available for other people who want to store it as well, right? Now the problem is the user has to pay additional fees for the 4 hours plus, and for the fees for storing it with the authorities, right? So that's a penalty that they have to go through. Right? So that's how we handle this in case the user picks up the luggage after the expiry of the selected duration. All right. Perfect. Now, the traveler returns to the kiosk and inputs their code, right? So this step should not exist. Doesn't make any sense. All the things should be done over here because we are taking the payment upfront, right? They have access to a certain period of time, right? So here we can say the step should not exist. There is no refund in case the users use the locker for a shorter period of time. Right? So for example, if you chose it for 4 hours, but then you take away all your belongings in 2 hours, you don't get a refund. You just have to still pay for those 2 hours extra, right? So that's that. So using the same approach, I went ahead and did the user flow for the app as well, right? It's quite straightforward over here. Now, one of the questions I had is why not allow users to create a guest account and not really create an account, with email and phone number? Why all that hassle, right? No, why not just use a guest account, right? So I asked this question to ChatGPT. So if this is done through an app, should users be allowed to use a service with a guest account, right? Now, whether the users should use a guest account or not depends on the specific needs of the train station as visitors. It's very obvious of that, depending on the type of users that come over there and what their mentality is and stuff like that, right? So what are the advantages of a guest account? It can make the service more accessible to users who may not want to create a full account. Makes a lot of sense. It can be more convenient for users who are entering a city for a short period of time and who are less tech savvy, right? Obviously. What are the disadvantages? It can make it difficult for the train station to track the usage and gather data. It can also be difficult for users to retrieve the code or extend the rental period if they lose to forget it. I don't think this is anywhere relevant, right? So from when I look at this, it feels like guest account can be an option, but I believe it's fine even if there is no guest account and users have to create an account, right? And it says here that the guest account option, users should be prompted to provide their contact information such as email or phone number. This can be used to send the code, reminder notifications, and also for the train station to contact the user in case of there are any issues or gather. So I believe that it's not really a big issue if there is no guest account, right? So I would just say provide a guest account option if users request for it. Right now, so the rest of the flow is pretty much the same of the way how it works. It's just that the initial part that's a little different, right? So now we can go ahead and start looking at metrics, which is obviously something that's very important as well. So here in ChatGPT, I said, what metrics would you measure for measuring the success of this service, right? And it gave me 6 things. So occupancy rate. Right? This measures the percentage of lockers that are in use at any given point in time. Now, this is very important because if you want to generate revenue, you need to make sure that your lockers are always occupied, right? Because you're actually not generating revenue if your lockers are free, right? So it needs to have a high occupancy rate. Now, and how do you know that? If your service is structured very well, if you have had a very good pricing strategy, if your app works perfectly fine, then people are going to want to use it. Then you have repeat usage rate. Now here it says the number of people who use it again and again. Now I strongly feel that this is not really a big problem, because as long as there is good occupancy rate, it's fine if there are no repeat users, right? Because I might not go to the same station again and again and again, right? If I'm a traveler and I'm a businessman, I might not go to the train station again and again. But the good use, but the advantage of measuring repeat usage is to see if people are satisfied with the service, right? Then you also have customer satisfaction, which you can take through surveys and stuff. Revenue, definitely the most important factor. Cancellation rate here again as well, right? So basically cancellation basically means that people reserved and they cancelled for some reason, right? Now this again does not really matter as long as the occupancy rate is actually high. Now the cancellation rate might be low if the experience of the app is not good and if people don't know how to use it, right? That's the problem, right? You also have a sixth one, which is time to access the locker, right? Now again, this I feel is not really that important, so I would pretty much let it go. So there are basically only three things that I would measure, which is occupancy rate, repeat usage, which means high satisfaction, and cancellation rate, right? To see if people are able to use the app effectively, right? So with that being said, we now complete every single thing that we need to solve this problem. And now it's just a matter of, creating a nice user flow and designing screens. So that's pretty much it for this video, guys. Thank you guys so much for watching. Hope you guys really enjoyed it. If you did, let me know in the comment section down below. Make sure to leave a like and subscribe to the channel for more amazing, awesome content. And I'll see you guys in my next videos. Till then, take care and bye-bye.